You're listening to the Valley Current.
That start with LegalZoom, where there's essentially a collection of pre-printed forms. It technically does start an entity, but the entity is completely and often improperly not considering the appropriate best practice steps, or really any practice steps, because LegalZoom is really a typing service. It's not really a law firm. They'll refer you to a lawyer, but they'll tell you in all the fine print, some of it's not so fine, that, hey, what we really do is we just fill in a bunch of forms and get them filed in Delaware, California, New York, wherever, Nevada, wherever you choose to form your entity. And then it's really up to you. And if you want our help in getting a referral, we'll do it. But don't treat it as legal advice. You know, of course, that's the kicker, because a lot of people say, but your name is LegalZoom. Aren't you providing the correct way for me to have a corporate business? And I've seen so many of these disasters where the result is what's called an alter ego case against the founder or founders, or sometimes the entire set of officers of the company, on the view that this was never really a valid corporation to begin with. And your point is well taken that, well, workers' comp is a good example of a place that you can get tagged. Payroll is another place that you can get tagged. So these are all areas of some concern. What's the next one on your list, Steve?
Yeah, I just had a case like that this morning, but we can move on in the interest of time. We have event cancellation insurance and any lessons from the Oceana Grill versus Lloyd's of London insurance claim litigation.
So far, I don't know the outcome of that litigation. I know it exists, but so far I would say that there will be many, many issues that arise from people who are prepaid for things, often on credit cards, and where it's pretty obvious that those things are not going to be delivered in the time frame of reasonable expectations. So an example would be a cruise liner that you've prepaid to do some sort of honeymoon or anniversary trip, say in May or June or even July or August, or maybe anytime in 2020. And there are a lot of folks that don't want to get on those ships because they feel like they'll become imprisoned on the ship, as has happened on some of these ships. And they just don't want to put themselves in that position. Well, if they have a credit card charge on their credit card, or some of them have spread the charges over like 6 months of credit card charges, they have the right to go to the credit card company, let's call it American Express, but it could be Visa, MasterCard, or any number of the cards, and say, look, I am canceling that trip under the view that a force majeure, that's a Latin term for meaning an overriding force or major force, has changed everything. And I'm not going to pay for that charge. In fact, I want to get refunded. I believe the current practice of American Express, Visa, MasterCard across the board will be to actually enforce that charge back. That is, to go back and say to the vendor, you're not delivering services to these people. They're not paying. We're the bank. This is a dispute. We'll go through the dispute resolution process, but we have to tell you, we think you should go to the federal government and try to get a bailout, because we don't see any way that you're going to collect, and we're not going to be in the middle of that collection problem, and we're certainly not going to be someone that has to take the rap here, that sort of thing, right?
I just got a letter from my gym saying that they are willing to waive all charges, but in the interest of being nice, would I consent to continue paying at 50% of the regular fee?
Well, it is kind of a gift. I mean, that's exactly right. If you want to be a kind of a jerk, you're going to say something like, you signed the contract. The basis of the contract is we're supposed to provide you with a trip on a certain date or accommodations or something else. We obviously can't do that, but we still want you to pay. And if you don't pay, we're going to sue you. I think social media will kill any such company that chooses to do that. So the reputational cost will be huge
maybe a better approach would be to offer a rain check at 50% off. And
But people are going to prioritize in ways that say, look, I don't care if you throw me out of the gym. There are other gyms out there that will be giving away freebie startup work. They may be a few blocks away. Maybe they'll be inconvenient to get to. But the reality is, in our competitive society, there are very few things, maybe with the exception of Uber and I suppose Lyft, but even they have competition, where you'd say, I'm stuck. I'm captive to that supplier. So it seems to me that this is a good example of where you do have a competitive economy. The odds are you can make your choices without having to worry that, hey, this is somehow going to prevent me from getting X, Y, or Z. Now, that said, there certainly are people who want to keep these companies in business. I just bought a couple $100 worth of credit gift cards to a cafe here in town that I really hope doesn't go out of business. That's sort of a gift charge advance. I don't expect to get that gift card. I expect to give the gift card to various people. I hope the restaurant doesn't close down. It's not Starbucks and it's not a major chain. It's an alternative coffee provider. I'm going to be sad if they go out of business. But at the same time, what else can you do other than maybe buy these gift cards from them? Now, you might choose to make a gift, but it's a good example of where survival of the fittest might actually result in Starbucks becoming more like a monopoly than it already is, even for a commodity like coffee, which, is just something that you put water and coffee beans together and you put hot water over it and you get a cup of coffee. There's no magic in a cup of coffee, regardless of what Starbucks wants to tell you, right?
And now I was just looking at a valuation timeline that showed that people knew to an increasing extent of these potential risks starting in January or February. And so you could have maybe a claim that, well, you knew about the risk, so it's on you.
You mean as a consumer or as a provider?
The provider could claim that, well, since a consumer knew about this risk.
I don't think our consumer law is that tough, frankly. I think our consumer, at least in California, our consumer law is so favorable to consumers that the odds are very, very high that any company that can't provide services as promised is just going to have an impossible time collecting on a small claims type charge. I mean, all these various charges tend to be relatively low numbers that end up getting canceled. Well, let's go to the next topic that you have on your list, because we have quite a list.
Yeah, we can merge number 6 and number 12. I see the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, and then the federal benefits that that were approved today.
Okay, what do you want to say about that, Steve? You take the next turn.
The total scope of this bailout appears to be about $2.2 trillion.
With a T. And just to give that context, Apple Computer is was worth about half that amount. It's worth far less now. Microsoft looks like it's holding up and is worth about half that amount. But imagine trillion with the T. It's like having two Microsofts, or combining Apple and Microsoft together as one ginormous conglomerate. That's how much money is being, I guess, printed here, you might say. I mean, I don't know where it's coming from, because it's not like we have excess budget.
And I looked last night, and they said that the actual cost, I guess there's some of the deal is in the form of loans with a potential repayment. And so I think the Congressional Budget Office pegged the thing to have a net cost of $500 billion. And the two things that stuck out the most were the direct payments to taxpayers, which was about $300 billion, and then a tax change called Revenue Code 469L, which is effectively a $170 billion giveaway to certain extremely wealthy special interests.
Yeah, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me, that they would be giving money to wealthy special interests, and it sounds like some effort to try to stop that failed. But I think that we should do a whole separate podcast once we've taken a hard look at the legislation. I did note that the bill that I saw a few days ago was 880 pages. And to me, whoever is drilling through that to figure it out has to have almost full-time staff to go through all the nooks and crannies of that legislation. I'm sure it's going to prove to be quite a dynamite or a collection of dynamite that will be used in the coming November elections, assuming the elections are actually really going to be held. I hope they are held, of course, and I hope they are somehow done electronically. I typically vote by postal mail in advance because I find it to be a hassle to sort of stand in line or wait for whatever person needs to quote unquote enroll me. But
Same
most
here.
people don't. Most people like to go to the polls. You know, most people like to walk and do their civic duty physically, but we don't get a big turnout because it's not as convenient as Google has enabled most of the world to get things done. Google and a host of other companies in our new digital economy, that's for sure.
Same here. I also vote by mail. It used to be held in the driveway of the person who lived right across the street, and that was extremely convenient. But nowadays, I do it by mail.
In San Francisco?
No, that was at an older address. So after moving, that made it less convenient.
Okay. Because your offices are in San Francisco. Do you live in San Francisco too?
I live in the East Bay, but my San Francisco office is about 200 feet away from the Embarcadero BART station.
And do you typically take BART over? Do you typically?
I actually drive half the time. We've got valet parking. And unfortunately, my whole building is closed right now. So this here is actually my home office, not my San Francisco office. I couldn't get into the San Francisco office.
Okay. I thought you were actually in San Francisco, but I thought you were now in San Francisco, so excuse me about that. But do you typically take BART or you typically drive in?
It's half and half for me.
Okay.
It depends upon what I'm carrying with me and how long I'm staying.
Right. Right. No, I think having anything near or close to BART really does enable sort of a smoother way of doing business. We're actually here in San Francisco, we're actually pretty close to the Caltrain, and we have offices also in San Francisco that's near the other end of the Caltrain. When we want to meet people in San Francisco, we do that as well. But these days, more and more, as you know, things get done by phone, by email, by video conference. And people, even before this virus, were not really keen on necessarily coming to an office, though they expected you and still expect you to have an office. It's going to be an interesting question what all this does to commercial real estate. We have real estate that's next door to us, another big law office building, traditional law office building. An entire top floor is empty. I want to say they said 7,000 square feet when I asked them, and this is recent. And the broker said, yeah, we're aiming to get triple net, which means you have to pay additional operating expenses. Looking to get $10 a square foot on that 7,000 square feet. That's $70,000 a month in rent. And then if you put the typical load of the operating expenses, probably another $10,000 a month. So we're talking $80,000 a month for a group of professionals in a law building. Now, albeit, it's a fairly nice building, Class A building and all that jazz, but is that really going to happen if people start working from home majority of their time? I just don't see even a big law firm saying, yeah, we don't have a problem spending over $1 million a year on a lease and a leasehold improvements and the like, because we just want to have the image of being in a Class A building on the top floor. I just have a hard time believing that.
Well, Jack, San Francisco is slightly different because so many people don't have cars. And one of their criteria is who can I reach by foot or by bicycle? And so I've had maybe 20% of my business choose me because of location. And of that, I'd say 5 or 10% actually work in my own building, which is a huge skyscraper with thousands of small businesses in it.
Okay, so your point is, look, in terms of people knowing that you have a practice in a building that's substantial. We here in Palo Alto, the building we have in Palo Alto is a building we actually own and control. So we actually have control of our destiny. Maybe in the future we'll own a building in San Francisco as well. But every time I've looked at pricing in San Francisco, I've always thought it's way out of sync with reality. That said, maybe all this is going to affect the prices of buildings in San Francisco and elsewhere, because I can tell you, I've certainly had a number of people say to me, look, maybe you should go virtual. And that's a whole nother topic that we can take up at another time. But this whole idea of the future being virtual, I've always rejected and sort of argued against, but maybe there's something to be said for it. Well, what's on the list? What's on the list next, Steve?
The prices in San Francisco are surprisingly reasonable. Let's talk more offline.
Okay, good.
On federal benefits, there's one thing which they haven't perhaps accurately measured, or perhaps it's only me and my clients who are going to benefit from it. But in addition to an NOL carryback, it used to be that you could carry losses forward 20 years and back 2 years. The 2-year carry back meant instant cash. And so that was considered a very generous component of the previous tax code. Trump eliminated that 2-year carryback to help pay for his corporate tax breaks. But part of the new federal rules, as I understand them, and I haven't read this code section in detail myself, will be to bring back that carryback. So you'll be able to carry your losses back to previous years when you were profitable. And this really means instant cash.
Okay, I'm putting us back on the video screen because we have to wrap up in a few minutes. But what your point is about the net operating loss,
Yes.
carry back and carry forward, is they've made it more favorable, right?
They are expected to. And then there's another point, again, not well measured, and it's unclear who will really claim this, but I will. And that is the Revenue Code Section 139, which allows an employer to cover their employees' personal coronavirus expenses. The personal medical stuff is non-deductible unless you itemize and have huge expenses. But if the employer reimburses you, then it's deductible to the employer and non-taxable to the employee.
But what do you have to prove? What does the employee have to prove? They have to prove doctor's bills and the like?
Right now, it's very generous. You don't even need receipts. So,
really?
Yes, you can have estimated expenses or comparable expenses, not actual. You don't even need to reimburse actual expenses. You can just pay a reasonable estimate of what the expenses are expected to be.
So what if,
and you can do this for a Schedule C or a Schedule E. So anybody who, say, has a hobby and turns it into a Schedule C business and then contracts coronavirus, well, they can pick up the testing expense and the treatment expense to the extent it's not reimbursed and have it be fully deducted on their Schedule C or Schedule E. Whereas,
okay, so let me ask you a question. Let's say that someone is an employer and says to the people, look, I know there's sort of all sorts of expenses you have right now because you have to deal with staying at home, and trying to deal with staying at home means you got to get groceries delivered or whatever the list of things are. I'm going to do 3 things. You tell me if this would work. Number 1, we can't afford to pay the full payroll anymore, so we're going to cut you down to 4 days a week. Technically, you don't have to work on either Friday and Monday. You decide. Obviously, that's a 20% reduction in pay. But point 2, I'm going to give you a tax-free amount of money to deal with estimated expenses for this crisis version of living that hopefully is going to mildly make up for that reduction in payroll. And then point 3, do the best you can to keep track of receipts and whatnot of additional expenses you've incurred in dealing with various bills that you wouldn't have had to incur, because I might need that in the event of an audit. But we're going to continue this approach for a while because it gets you a tax benefit. It gets me a tax benefit. You're not going to pay taxes on a certain lower amount.
Okay,
Follow?
it sounds great. I go for it. I want 4 ground rules, a written policy.
Okay.
Everybody in the organization is covered, no matter what the nature of their employment relationship, self-employment or employee.
Okay.
It's got to be non-discriminatory. You can put a ceiling on how much you pay out, so you won't get more than the 10,000. Nobody will get more than the 10,000. And no luxury items or unreasonable items.
Okay, so that's a good way to end, because we'll pick up on some of the topics we didn't cover, because we're going to get paused out of this meeting pretty soon because I didn't set it to go beyond 35 minutes or so. But in general, I think what you've done, Steve, is you've allowed us to see there's lots of strategies for folks to use. Section 139 is one of them. So let's remind people very quickly who you are. I'll put your website back on the screen so basically people can see who you are. I'll put the share back on that I have of you and your firm. We're Computer Law Group. We're the lawyers for the internet economy. We're here. You're at Tax Service to You. That's TAXSERVICE number 2 and then you. That is you, just the letter U, meaning as in Ulysses, u.com. Steve Rabin, CPA, most tax problems fixed. But tell Steve, tell people your phone number, and your
Sure.
availability is pretty clear. You're always available.
Why, thank you. Yes, we have 24/7 chat. My phone number is 408-887-6433. That's my cell phone, and I answer it most of the time.
Great. Thanks, Steve. You've done a great job. I'm Jack Russo. I'm the managing partner of Computer Law Group. We're a Silicon Valley law firm. We've been here for going on 4 decades. I've been in practice for over 4 decades. We have offices in Silicon Valley, Palo Alto, and San Francisco. We look forward to helping you, and we'll help you in combination with Steve. Steve and I collaborate on many cases. We have a part of a practice that deals with entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship, and you can see that practice at, maybe I should put that up quickly. It's called Entrepreneur Law. It's a different website, but it's essentially the same. It is the same firm. Entrepreneur, let's see if I can get it right the first time. EntrepreneurLawGroup.com. Let's see if it works here. Of course, the internet's taking a long time to respond on a Friday afternoon. Yeah, that's us as well. And you can find us there. That's some members of the team. Our goal is to support founders and startup entrepreneurs, and especially serial entrepreneurs, which are people that make their way in doing multiple startups over time. And we've done a lot of it. That's me on the right side, Jack Russo. That's my partner, Chris Sargent. Lucy Goodnow is there. We look forward to helping you. Thanks, Steve, for being available today. And we'll look forward to collaborating. I'll look forward to talking to you separately. And we're going to run this series every Friday at 3 with the view of providing more and more information over time so that people can actually feel good about the support that they get, because that support is pretty substantial, and it is something that we continue to do and we strive to continue to do.
Thank you for having me on, Jack.
Great. Thanks, Steve. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Always a pleasure.
Sure, it's always a pleasure. Bye-bye.
Tune in next time on The Valley Current.